Women make up 70% of the healthcare workforce, but only 20% of its leadership. On Her Story, we'll explore the careers of bold and influential women from Silicon Valley to Capitol Hill and learn how they've overcome the odds. This is Her Story, a program where we explore what's beyond the glass ceiling.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Dr. Joanne Conroy, and I am a member of the Advisory Council for Her Story, which is an opportunity for us to speak to women leaders so other women can imagine their own leadership possibilities. And I'm thrilled today to have Senator Jeanne Shaheen here. You must be living under a rock if you don't appreciate what she's done for women and what she's done for women, not only politically, but in the era of women's reproductive rights. Jeanne Shaheen is our senator from New Hampshire, and she is the first woman who was elected, American woman who was elected both governor and senator in the United States, and sets the standards for a lot of us. She is the highest ranking woman on the Armed Services Committee, and she has been a champion for reproductive rights. And today, they're beginning to hear the Mississippi case at the Supreme Court. So it's more relevant today than any of us thought when we started on this journey over 40 years ago. But thank you, Senator Shaheen, for everything that you do. This conversation for the next 20 minutes is really going to be about her leadership story. There's so much we can learn from women leaders that have forged the path for us. So, Senator Shaheen, I'd like to kind of get started with, how did you get into politics? You were a small business owner in New Hampshire. What happened?
Well, Joanne, first of all, thank you for inviting me to participate in Her Story and for your leadership on the board, and of course for all of your leadership at Dartmouth-Hitchcock, both at the hospital and at the medical school. It has made a huge difference to have you there, and we so appreciate your being in New Hampshire. So thank you. And as you point out, this is a momentous day for those of us who are concerned about making sure that women continue to have control over our own reproductive health and our futures. And obviously the Supreme Court in the Dobbs v. Mississippi case is going to be acting on that very important personal right. And as you say, I never thought 50 years ago when Roe v. Wade was passed, almost 50 years, that we would be here 50 years later still fighting to defend this right to make our own decisions about our reproductive health. So it is a momentous time. But your question was, how did I get involved in politics and running for the Senate? You know, I have this theory that some people are born with the ability to sing, some people have artistic ability and they can paint, and some of us get the political gene. And I happen to have gotten that political gene. My parents were always interested in community and what was happening nationally on the news, but they were never involved in politics. It's something that I got interested in as a student in the 60s as the women's movement and the civil rights movement and the effort to address the war in Vietnam were all happening at the same time, and it was hard not to get engaged in politics. And I actually got started in campus politics, fighting to change hours for women on campus where I went to school. So that was my start. And then, of course, after I got married, we moved to New Hampshire, where we are blessed to have the New Hampshire presidential primary. And anyone who's interested in politics has a great opportunity to get involved in politics with the presidential primary.
So talk a little bit about the steps that you had to go through in order to actually be a candidate for your first statewide role, which I think was governor of the state. That's not just putting your name on a ballot. There is so much that has to happen behind the scenes in order to actually get into the primary, be successful in the primary, and then in the general election.
Well, that's true. And certainly I would not have come forward if I didn't have the experience that I had had in politics before deciding to run for office myself. You know, I was in Mississippi as a graduate student when Jimmy Carter got elected president, or started running for president, I should say. He had been elected governor of Georgia when I was working in a newly integrated school in Mississippi, and had made his famous statement about the need to end segregation in the South. And I got interested in him because I was dealing with issues of segregation because I was teaching in a newly integrated school. And when he started running for president, we were back in New Hampshire, and I had the opportunity to get involved in his campaign. And that started off 15 years of working behind the scenes for candidates, both for president and for governor. And at the end of that time, I decided it was time to run for office myself, that the candidates who were all men who I'd been working for had not been getting it done. So I really ought to put throw my hat in the ring and run myself. And so I ran for the state Senate and served 3 terms in the state Senate. And that's what really gave me what I thought was the experience and really the interest in running for governor. You know, I think it's something that women have historically been more reluctant to do, to put ourselves forward as candidates, than men. I spent some time as the director at the Institute of Politics at the Kennedy School at Harvard between being governor and running for the Senate. And it always distressed me to ask the undergraduate students who were there for programs how many of them wanted to run for office someday. And almost every male hand in the room would go up, and only, maybe a quarter to a third of the young women. Fortunately, I think that is changing, but we have been more reluctant as women to run for office. And it's important because, as we know, having women in office to make decisions about policy reflects the experiences that we've had as women. And I always say they're not any better or worse than men's, but they're different. And it's important to have women's voices at the table when we're talking about policy.
Yeah. Just as we look at our board of trustees, it's important to have a diverse board because you actually make better decisions
Absolutely.
With greater diversity. So homogeneous boards are sometimes myopic about the things they really need to address. I think a lot of women, and probably even some men, don't always appreciate there's a lot of hard work behind the scenes, as you've just revealed, before you actually step into a public office role. Anything, when you think back in your time as governor, what surprised you most when you entered that role that you maybe didn't completely appreciate as you were running for that office?
There are 2 things that really stand out. One is I think I had the perception that once I got elected governor, it wouldn't matter that I was a woman. People wouldn't treat me differently than they would a man who was elected governor. And what I discovered is that that gender bias still exists. It may be more subtle, but it does exist. And so just because you achieve a certain goal or position doesn't mean that you're not still dealing with many of those same issues. I'm sure you probably have experienced those in your career as well. That was one thing that I had not expected in quite the same way. The other thing that, and this is just a very sort of personal reflection, one of the things I also didn't appreciate was the extent to which, as governor, I was the official mourner for the state. We had a number of very high-profile tragedies during my years as governor, and it was very important to be able to be out there to represent the views and to mourn for the people of the state, to mourn with people from New Hampshire. To 9/11 happened during my time as governor, to be able to reflect on that. And I hadn't appreciated how important that is to people, to have officials who at very difficult times are there to empathize, to reflect on what's happening, and to help us all as we translate in our own lives how to respond to those kinds of tragedies.
Yeah, that's very interesting. 5 weeks after I got here, we had an active shooter up here. Mm-hmm. And it was really important for the organization for me to just ask everybody how they were feeling in the town hall. And all of a sudden, people want a leader to be empathetic. They want to be able to share how they're feeling. And I'm sure after 9/11, there was just this probably outpouring of shock and grief from people that thought, our world has changed forever. Mm-hmm. So I loved in your bio, I'm going to shift to the Senate, that the Kremlin would not give you a visa. And how does that make you feel?
I think I must be doing something right if Vladimir Putin won't give me a visa.
You're probably in that very small select group of people that are on his do not fly list. So
yes, that's okay. Although, it's as we are concerned about Putin in Russia, what I try and remind myself and others is that it's not the Russian people I have an issue with. It is the authoritarian dictatorship that Putin has put in place in Russia. I just had the opportunity to speak with one of the most widely known opposition leaders in Russia, Vladimir Kara-Murza. And one of the things he talked about is the wonderful history in Russia and the commitment and desire of the Russian people to experience freedom and democracy in that country. So it's really important that we separate a dictator like Vladimir Putin from the aspirations of the Russian people.
Yeah, great point. Now, you spent some time at the Kennedy School. Why did you make the decision to run for Senate? Or is that something that you were considering and it's a combination of timing and opportunity?
I really wasn't. I ran for the Senate in 2002 as I was leaving my third term as governor, and I lost that race to John Sununu, the current governor of New Hampshire's brother. And after that, I spent about 3.5 very fun years at the Institute of Politics at the Kennedy School. And I really enjoyed that position. It was a great opportunity to meet so many exciting figures who came through Harvard and who were involved in world affairs and politics at the Kennedy School. But as I looked at what was happening in the country, those were the years of the war in Afghanistan, our invasion of Iraq, the weapons of mass destruction, which didn't exist, the really divisions within the country that kept growing wider during the George W. Bush years. And I just felt like it was important not to sit out the election in 2008. I have 7 grandchildren, and I thought about what I would say to my grandchildren years from that point in 2007 when I made the decision. I said it was hard to think about telling them that, well, I didn't run for the Senate because I wanted my weekends off and I wanted to have a chance to get out of politics and not have to work that hard. That just didn't seem like a good enough reason. I thought it was really important to try and win election, to run again, and to work to address some of what I thought was very wrong with the direction that the country was going in at that time.
Yeah, well, your commitment has been very visible to a lot of people and certainly to your grandchildren. So I think you've set a great role model. You've been a great role model for them. Talk a little bit about when you went to the Senate. For many of us, we hear the partisan kind of rancor, but there must be it must be very different actually being within that club of 100 than most people actually appreciate that just get social media and or the nightly news.
It is. It's really frustrating because there are, without a doubt, partisan divisions, and it's one of the things that I find most frustrating about the Senate. But most of those are really led by a few people. Most of us on both sides of the aisle work together on most issues most of the time and do that pretty well. If you look at the list of legislation that we've passed in the last 6 months, we passed the bipartisan infrastructure bill, which I was very proud to be one of 5 Democrats who worked with 5 Republicans to get that done. We passed what's called USICA, the act that will help to make us competitive with China. We're working together to get funding bill, and I'm the chair of the Commerce, Justice, and Science Appropriations Subcommittee. My ranking member is Jerry Moran from Kansas. He and I reached agreement on our portion of the appropriations bill several months ago. And so there is a lot of bipartisan work that goes on that never gets talked about very much. I just led a delegation to Halifax to the International Security Forum there, 3 Democrats and 3 Republicans, and we all were very united in our positions on foreign policy. And I think that's important for not just the United States, but for the international community to see that we are working together and promoting U.S. interests around the world.
What do you think it is about you, your leadership characteristics, that result in you being tapped for these kind of conversations that will create a bipartisan result? What do you think you bring to that conversation?
I hope that what I can bring to that conversation is a pragmatism, a willingness to listen to other points of view and respect those positions, and to look for ways to compromise, to look for things that we have in common, as opposed to singling out differences, because that's how we reach agreement and compromise. And this nation was built on compromise. That's, if we look at studying the Constitution, studying the birth of this country, it was all about people figuring out a way to come to agreement and move forward together. And that's still what we've got to do in the best interests of America. And to the extent that we have forces on the right and left that are trying to pull us apart, it's unfortunate, because it's only when we're able to work together and compromise that we can make progress. And right now, given the challenges facing America and the world, it's certainly critical that we figure out a way to work together.
What advice would you have for young women that might raise their hand when you say, who wants to run for public office? How would you tell them to get started?
I used to have the chance to talk to a number of young people about their interest in politics and how to get started. And what I would always say to them is, think about where you want to go, where you would like to live. If it's back to your hometown or if it's someplace else, go there and get involved in the community and whatever it is you're passionate about. If it's schools, run for the school board. If it's the homeless, work on a committee that's addressing homelessness or housing. But think about what you care about and go work on that, because that's the best entree into whatever you might want to do next. You may decide that you tried running for office and you don't like to do that, but you do like to work on the policy side. Work for a candidate that you care about. Get involved in their campaign. My experience as somebody who spent 15 years working on campaigns is that if you work hard and you're good at it, that you'll have an opportunity to advance and do almost anything you're interested in. So there are all kinds of ways to get involved. There are all sorts of positions that are just looking for people who want to put their time and energy towards making whatever the issue is successful. So I think the only thing that's missing is a commitment to get involved.
Yeah. Yeah, I would say that people just need to step forward probably and say, I'm interested. You obviously are a pretty good campaigner, though. You've done very well in being elected to the Senate as well as reelected more than once. What do you think the secret is of effective campaigning for a woman?
I don't know if it's a secret or not. I like campaigning because I like people. I like talking to people. I like hearing their views on things. I like responding to their concerns. It's amazing. And one of the best things about being in public office for me has been the people that I've had a chance to meet, the people that I've worked with. I have a wonderful staff who do such good work every day. And that's without a doubt the best part, being able to talk to people whose lives you may have had the opportunity to influence because of something that we've done in our office or something that we've worked on.
Yes, your office and yourself are really known for really addressing issues of your constituents in a very timely manner. There are two categories that people talk about leadership: accidental leaders and intentional leaders. You feel like you've been intentional in your leadership steps, but what do you think?
I think that's probably true. I think because I made the decision to run for office, I have to say that was intentional. I made that decision and went after it. So I think I would have to say that intentional is probably accurate.
Now, if you were going to write a letter to your younger self, what advice would you give young Jean Shaheen, who just moved to New Hampshire?
Relax and enjoy life. One of the pieces of advice I got from a governor who had been in office for a while when I first got elected governor was to work to enjoy what you're doing every day. And I think that's probably advice that I would give myself. Take more time to relax and enjoy what you're doing. Don't always be so focused on the next thing I have to do, but think more about how much I appreciate the opportunity to do this and to enjoy it at every chance that I can get.
Yeah. Well, Senator Shaheen, you've really been an inspiration and a role model for so many women that are in public office right now, and I believe women that are aspiring to public office. And I've just finished Nancy Pelosi's biography, so we'll be waiting to read yours.
I know my kids keep saying, "When are you going to write a book, Mom?" I said, I don't know.
There are a lot of lessons to be learned when we actually follow the path of our women leaders across the country. Thank you so much for giving us your time and serving as an inspiration for a lot of women that want to assume leadership roles at the state and the federal level.
Well, thank you. I appreciate this opportunity. It's always fun to talk about our journey, where we've come from and what we still have to do. And thank you for making that possible and for everything that you're doing to serve as a role model and mentor for the women who you work with.
Thank you very much. And we'll let you get back to work.